Hey, what's up, Logic fans? Welcome to another video. Today we're going to start a brand new chapter, Chapter 4. So this is our first section of Chapter 4. We're going to begin Quantificational Symbolization. We're going to explain all about what that is. And our focus is going to be on Subject Predicate Discourse. Let's rock. Alright, Logic fans, since we're starting a new chapter, I think it's good to take a moment to pause and reflect on the general structure of the course, where we're at, what we've been doing, and where we're headed. Okay, so the book is designed to exhibit some parallel structure to make things easier for you to follow and anticipate what we're doing and why we're doing it. So let's review what we did in the first three chapters up until now. So in the first three chapters, chapter 1, we covered propositional symbolization. So you learned how to write, A arrow B with parentheses and the ampersand and the negation. You learned how to string all those symbols together properly. All right. And in chapter 2, you learned how to sort of imbue those symbolizations with a semantics, with truth tables, okay, with meaning. And then in chapter 3, we looked at, validity and inference from a different point of view other than the semantic point of view, which was how to manipulate these strings following particular rules. We looked at the strings that we developed in chapter 1 syntactically, okay? Basically, for the rest of the course, we have a very similar procedure, okay? So in the present chapter, chapter 4, what we're going to do is we're going to do not propositional symbolization, but quantificational symbolization. I'll explain why shortly, okay? And instead of doing propositional semantics, we're going to do quantificational semantics, but it's the same idea as before, right? First, we learn how to symbolize these symbols. We're going to be introducing new symbols, just like we did in chapter 1, in a new way. Some of them are going to be familiar, like ampersand, wedge, arrow, the parentheses, things like that. But there's going to be some new ones too, okay? And then we're going to, after we've learned how to properly symbolize those things, okay, we're going to learn how to think about those quantificational sentences, the quantificational symbolization semantically, right, in terms of truth and falsity and meaning. And so all of this is going to mirror itself, and then eventually when we get to chapter 6, we will be looking at those quantificational sentences that we develop in the symbolization part of the present chapter, chapter 4, syntactically, in which case the rules, a lot of them are going to come back from chapter 3, like modus ponens, modus tollens, de morgans. So it is important that you understood all of this prior to jumping into this stuff, and understanding what we did in this is going to give you a really good leg up on understanding these materials. So that's where we're at. That's what we're doing. That's how the course and the text are structured. Let me talk a little bit about why we need to do quantificational symbolization. It's like, well, we've got this symbolization, capital A, ampersand, negation B. Why do we need a new symbolization system? So let's address that really quickly so you know why we're doing what we're doing, what the need is for it. So why do we need new symbolic apparatus, all right? Well, let me just give you a really simple example. This could be done in a variety of ways, but I want to make the idea very intuitive and clear to you up front. So let's suppose, for example, that we have this argument here. Now, this argument, pause and take a second. Intuitively, is this argument valid or invalid? Okay, hopefully you can see right away that this is a valid argument, okay? So this here is something we would recognize as a valid argument, and so any kind of logic that we develop should not only be able to handle this case, but it should be able to handle it in such a way that the outcome is that the argument is valid, okay? So let's go ahead and symbolize this this argument symbolically. So if we have W is just the first premise, okay, so W is just all philosophers are wise, and Aristotle is a philosopher, is, we'll symbolize that with a capital P, and we'll symbolize the conclusion with the capital letter C. Then we're going to get, we'll symbolize the conclusion with capital letter A. We might, there's other ways you could do this, okay? But you might end up symbolizing this argument, which we regard as valid, this way. But notice, if you run this on a truth table, it's going to come out invalid, right? Just consider the case where W is true, P is true, and A is false. Similarly, from your syntactic rules, you're not going to be able to get from W and P to A. There's just no way to do that, okay? So we've run into a bit of a snag here, okay? And the snag is that we've got this argument that's intuitively valid, right? But when we regiment the argument in our symbolic notation, our propositional notation, it turns out that the argument is invalid, which is not something we want our logic to do, okay? We want our logic to be able to capture this argument and have it come out valid, all right? And so part of the problem of what's going on in this case is that it turns out that a sentence like this, for example, all philosophers are wise, as simple as that might sound to your ears, that is actually a sentence which exhibits a pretty sophisticated logical structure. And the problem is that when we represent it propositionally, for example, with a capital W, right, we don't capture the full sophistication of the logical complexity of this sentence. When we represent it this way, it's just sort of represented atomically, like it's got no parts or something to it, okay? It turns out that a sentence like this does have a lot of parts to it, and there's actually a lot going on. So what we require is a way of symbolizing the sentence that reveals its total logical structure, as opposed to just sort of in this sort of brute way of representing it. We need a way of symbolizing it that sort of carves out its logical structure and makes all of its logical subtleties and sophistication transparent. And then the idea is once we have a way of doing that, of symbolizing the complex structure of this sentence and revealing that complex structure, then we will see that the argument is in fact valid, okay? So, it doesn't have to be this argument that is valid, but we don't really have a way propositionally of symbolizing it. There are many others. So, for example, let's just take a single sentence. Okay, let's just look at it this way. All right. So let's take for example, I don't know, one from literature. Okay. So here's a sentence. All right. All children grow up except for one. So this is from J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan. Okay. And you can tell this is a reference to Peter Pan. Peter Pan doesn't grow up, right? Now, looking at this sentence, I mean, this is a beautiful sentence. Part of the reason that we regard this as a beautiful sentence, that it's aesthetically or literary pleasing, is that a sentence like this exhibits incredible logical structure. And symbolized in our propositional way, you're just losing a lot of that logical structure. I mean, a sentence like this is just absolutely incredible in terms of its logical sophistication. And so, and notice we can make references, we can make inferences rather from it. Okay, not to mention sentences like there is only one even prime or something like that. Okay, these sentences are incredibly sophisticated, logically speaking, and so if we're going to capture inferences from sentences like this, especially these nice, beautiful ones that sort of explain or exhibit a ton of logical structure in a very simple way, that have that kind of richness, we want a symbolic apparatus equal to the task of capturing that richness so that we can understand the inferences from them correctly. So we're going to start introducing that new symbolic apparatus in Chapter 4, and in particular, today in Section 4.1, we're going to be looking at the basic elements of that new symbolic apparatus, which is Subject Predicate Discourse. All right, then, we begin with Subject Predicate Discourse. Now, big fancy term for something that you're already extensively familiar with, okay? And it's sentences like this. These sentences are all sentences of subject predicate discourse, okay? So let's take a look at them. Things like Shaq is tall, Maria is nice, Paul went to the movie. Okay, notice if we were to symbolize these propositionally, we would say something like this, right? Right? They would just be symbolized in this sort of brute way. We're going to be symbolizing them in a much more sophisticated way soon because these sentences actually have more logical structure than simple S just reveals. Okay, so Shaq is tall, Maria is nice, Paul went to the movies, John is no slouch, which we will render as it's not the case that John is a slouch. Okay, 5 is prime. All right, these are all subject predicates. So notice every one of these sentences has a subject. The subject of this one is Shaq. The subject of this one is Maria, Paul, John, the number 5. Okay, and they ascribe a property to these subjects. In the case of this one, we ascribe the property or the predicate is tall to Shaq. Okay, and is nice to Maria, and something Paul did there. So it's subject predicate discourse. It's ascribing a property to a thing. 4 is a little bit careful. We got to be a little bit careful there. It's denying that a predicate applies to a certain subject. Okay, I'll talk more about that later in these videos. And in this case, we have this property being ascribed to this subject. Okay, so subject predicate discourse, where Shaq is the subject and is tall is the predicate. Okay, so we're going to start off nice and easy introducing our new symbolic apparatus here. So let's get ourselves on the same page. For each of 1 through 5, ignore this one for now. Okay, I'm going to talk about that one later. Ignore number 4. For each of 1 through 5, identify the subject. Okay, shouldn't take too long, should be pretty easy. What are the subject of 1, 2, 3, and 5, skipping 4? Pause now. Okay, should be pretty straightforward, right? So it's going to be Shaq, Maria, Paul, and 5, respectively. That's the subject. Now, notice, I'm talking about the person, the man, Shaq, the thing that's 7 feet tall, 7 feet 2, 7 foot 3 inches, whatever it is, okay? I'm talking about Maria, the person, Paul, the person. I'm talking about the number 5 in this case, okay? That's to be contrasted with the means by which we express the subject. The means by which we express the subject is a proper name, okay? So let's go through this together so you catch what I'm talking about here, the difference, okay? So in A, we identify the subject of 1, 2, 3, and 5. We're skipping 4, okay? And they were this person, this person, this person, and this thing, whatever the number 5 is, okay? Maybe you think it's a concept. Maybe you think it's something else. That's the subject, all right? Now, the proper name is the means by which we refer to the thing, the subject, okay? So, for example, in this particular case, right, in the case of number 1, the proper name is the word Shaq, and that's why we use the parentheses, because now I'm not talking about the man, the thing that's 7 foot 2 or 7 foot 3. I'm talking about the word, right? The word is not 7 foot 3, okay? And the proper name is what we use to refer to the thing, okay? So we want to distinguish these things carefully for our future work. So similarly, in the case of 2, the proper name is Maria, proper name is Paul, and the proper name in the 5th case is, in fact, 5, okay? Similarly, we want to draw a distinction between the property that's being expressed, being tall, the way Shaq is, okay, and our language that we use to describe that, or the language we use to express that property. So let's do that. Okay, so let's do this together. Okay, so for C, what I want you to do is identify the property. Okay, now the property of the first one is being tall. It's being that way. The property of the second one is being nice. You know, Maria's being that way, okay? Paul's going to the movies or having gone to the movies. All right, I'll just put going to the movies. And in the case of the last one, right, we've got the property of being prime, right? So being prime, let's say. All right, that's the property there, all right? That's the way the thing is. Now, the means by which we express that way of being, the means by which we use language to express that the thing is that way is just, you know, this bit of language here is prime, for example. Okay, that's how we do it. We use that construction. Okay, all right. I'm going to spill us into the next video and introduce some symbolic notation based on this. So catch you on the next one, 4.1b.